Hey, Tyre, how are you doing?
Hey, good man. How are you?
Good, good. I'll introduce myself. I'm Richard Hoare. I'm a music lawyer, and we are here today to just have a bit of a chat, just you, me, and the whole internet about the music business and specifically about record deals, contracts, some of the other legal issues that artists may face. And this is all part of Beatport's incredible Beats in School program, of which you are the inaugural winner, and as well as some of the very nice looking equipment which you seem to have behind you, which I think is part of
lucky. Some of this stuff's part of the prizes that I've won, so I'm pretty stoked. Christmas came a little bit early this year. I'm stoked, yeah. But hey everyone, I'm Taya, the Beats in School winner, and just here with Richard, and I've got a bunch of questions that I've got for him about sort of the legal side of things in the industry, some of the things that I have no idea about and have always really wanted to know. So thanks for having me. I guess we should kick it off.
Yeah, so shall I say a little bit about myself first of all? I'm a music lawyer, as I said. I've been doing the job for about 12 years. Used to work at a big London music law firm, learning the ropes alongside some amazing, some of the best music lawyers in the business, who are advising people like Daft Punk, Aphex Twin, Faithless, people like that. A few years ago, we had a family, moved out to the countryside. You can see in my little rural retreat here, and started a new firm called Hoare Associates. We've been going for just over 2 years. And the main focus of what we do is advising artists like yourself, small labels, mainly in independent music, mainly in electronic music, on their deals, essentially, their record deals, publishing deals, sample clearances, featured artist deals, all that kind of stuff, which we're going to talk about in a bit more detail in a minute. So mainly advising people like yourself, but we're also super fortunate that we get to work with some amazing established artists like Above and Beyond, who I think are going to be involved in the next Beats in School thing, Bonobo, DJs like Eats Everything, Annie Mac, legends like Sasha, Burial, all kinds of amazing people.
Wow.
And yeah, so we're very, very fortunate. We get to be able to share our experience and our advice with all the artists who we work with. And so incredibly excited to be asked by Beatport to be part of this, because I think it's a fantastic opportunity to share information and to remove some of the mystery around thorny issues relating to agreements in music, which still, despite all the information that's available on the internet, still seem to be shrouded in mystery. So we're hoping to try and clarify some of those things here today.
Yeah, absolutely. I've looked up a bunch of these questions on the internet for a long time, and I've never got a proper answer. So I'm pretty excited to hear what you've got to say, buddy. Okay. So I guess I'll start it off. First question I had was, what's the first thing an artist should do when offered a record deal?
That's a great question, and I think the simple answer is speak to someone. Who's going to be able to give you some advice on it. Now, that it doesn't have to be a lawyer. I'm going to obviously say speak to a lawyer, but it could be another artist. It could be a manager, or it could be someone else, a friend who's got experience in the industry. The reason why I would suggest you speak to a lawyer, and in particular a lawyer who's got experience in the type of deals that you're looking at. So don't just speak to your friend's dad who does shipping law or something like that. That can sometimes lead to more problems than it solves. But the reasons why I think speaking to a lawyer is a good idea are, firstly, because we look at so many different types of deals that hopefully we can advise on different ways of doing things, or what's usual, what's not usual. Secondly, because our advice should be up to date. You know, if you work with someone who's doing deals day in, day out, we should be able to give you advice based on what the current state of the art is. But obviously everyone's got horror stories about, like, they can't find a lawyer to start with, or lawyers are too expensive, or they're too busy, they never get back to them on the phone. You hear the same complaints again and again and again. And so I think, unfortunately, historically, people just don't get paperwork looked at. And so it can be, which can lead to some problem down and get advice straight up.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's interesting. What's the process? Sorry, what's the actual process involved from getting an offer or to signing a deal?
So once an offer comes in, and an offer may be, you might get a sheet of paper, or you might get more likely an email with some basic points written on it. It's really a 3-stage process. We always say you've got stage 1 is you have a period of time where you're going to negotiate, or you might not negotiate. There might not be any room for negotiation. Negotiate the main points of the arrangement between you and the label. So that's going to be things like how long you work with them, which countries they're allowed to release music in, what you get paid in terms of royalties, in terms of advances, what else the label are going to do for you, etc. So you're going to have a period of time where you're talking about those key important things. The second stage is you're going to be looking at, you're hopefully going to be presented with a slightly more detailed agreement, a more legally binding document, which won't just be a list of points. It will actually tell you what, set out the process for what happens if you fall out, how do you check what you've been paid, etc., etc. Lots of important details. And the third part of the process, which is going to sound incredibly obvious, but it's something that often forget doesn't happen, is actually getting the deal signed. Because and you say this to people and they're like, yeah, but the reality is often people will post agreements back and forth to each other. They'll get lost in the post, or they'll forget to sign it, or they'll be too excited, they just want to get on with releasing the music. And so they
never actually sign.
It never actually gets signed, which sometimes may work in the artist's favour, but it can obviously cause huge headaches if you and the label ever have a disagreement about something, because whilst an agreement does exist, even though it's not signed, you've obviously been working together, so there is some form of agreement between you. You get into all sorts of uncertainty about, well, what terms do we apply to the relationship if the agreement was never actually signed? So that's something we see come up again and again and again. And in 2017, there's no reason to not get things signed. You can use things like DocuSign or SignNow, one of the sort of digital signing platforms, which lots of labels are embracing now. And it means you can just get stuff signed there and then. But it's important. I mention it because it's something that you would think is obvious, but it just doesn't always happen. Yeah,
true. That's really interesting you say that, because I've released tracks with labels, and there's supposed to be some sort of document, but it's sort of never come through. So who really owns the rights to my music, if that's the case? Like, do they have the right to release that, or to have it remixed or whatever, or is it still myself?
Well, it's going to raise some interesting questions. They're almost certainly not going to own those recordings outright, because in order to transfer the ownership from you to the label, that's normally, and again, I'm just going to caveat this because you're obviously based in sunny Byron Bay. We're in the rainy UK, and the laws between different countries obviously differ. So I'll talk based on my experience in under the UK system, but it's broadly similar in different territories. The rules in the UK would say that unless you've assigned that work over to the label under a written agreement, then unless the label have paid, actually, put you in the studio, paid for that recording to be made. So in the type of situation that you're explaining, where you've recorded a track at home, delivered it to the label, ownership in that agreement, in those recordings, are going to vest in you in the first instance.
Sure.
That's not to say that without a signed agreement in place, the label can't exploit the recordings, because you've probably given them the implied permission to use them. But if you ever have an issue with that, if they don't have the signed agreement in place, they're on. It makes their position very, very difficult because they don't have the necessary consents and permissions that you'd need. So you're usually open to you in that situation to say, I'm sorry, you know, I may have given you permission to have this up on Spotify for a period of time, but that, you know, I'm terminating that license effectively. So there's, as you can see, if there's no agreement in place, you get into areas of uncertainty. And so we'd always, it's in everyone's interest really that you've all got some degree of certainty as to who owns what they can do with it, for how long, etc. For
sure. Hopefully I don't have to worry too much about that. What are some of the most common pitfalls to try and avoid in record deals?
That's a really good question. There are a lot. So we've touched on a couple, but let's pick two. Let's pick two for ease of reference. I'd say probably two things that come up most frequently are issues relating to exclusivity. So that means if you sign a record deal, are you signing to that record company exclusively for a period of time? Because if you are, that means that you can't put records out with anyone else. And if that record deal has options in it for future work, you can get into all sorts of issues around, well, say you have a track that blows up commercially, you sign it to a major record label. That major record label, usually their default position will be that they're going to work with you exclusively for a period of time. So you have this one kind of commercial success, and then but you want to go back and go back to your roots and do an underground release or two on your friends' labels, on your own label. If we don't deal with that at the outset and the agreement specifically make provision for that, then you're not going to be able to do that. You'll get into situations of distrust potentially with the label where they're thinking, they don't want you to release something that starts off underground and then gets big. So it's really important at the outset. And again, especially with electronic artists who work under a number of different pseudonyms or have different projects, it's about being very clear what those record deals cover and what they don't cover. So if you're working as hire, but you've got other projects on the side, what can you and can't you do outside of those deals? So I'd say that's probably pitfall number one. What does this deal prevent me from doing? And what can I continue to do? The other thing that comes up again and again and again is how you deal with material on the records which has been created by a third party. So I know you wanted to talk about sampling later. We'll talk about that in some detail. But as well as sampling, it's if you've brought a featured vocalist in, or if you've brought another producer in, someone's contributed to the track. Or if you've got musicians on there, it's about ensuring that you've got the rights from those people, because again, at a low level, those things tend to, it's all fine. It's as soon as things start to escalate, as soon as you have a hit on your hands, there's a terrible phrase that gets used again and again and again, which is where there's a hit, there's a writ, which basically means that as soon as something becomes popular, then, and if things haven't been locked down, then people suddenly start to have a different expectation of what they should.
Yeah, right. That they want a bit of a chunk of it as well. Hey.
Yeah. So again, best to get those things sorted out at the outset if you can. And these are just things that we try to deal with before they become an issue. But featured vocalists, samples we'll talk about later. Again, it's kind of, people think it'll all be fine, and then it can cause problems if they're not dealt with if a stitch in time.
For sure. What about what if you got a vocalist in to sort of sing a popular song, like a re-sing a song. Is that like would you have to pay rights to the original artist still, or?
Okay, that's a really good question again, because you've got it's important to start thinking about the different types of rights that you've got in the track you make. It's really, I think electronic music is in some ways it's more confusing, because if you're used to making music in a studio on your own, you are the songwriter, you're the producer, you're the performer, you're fulfilling all of those roles. Traditionally, obviously, you go back to Motown, you had one team of people writing the songs, you had one person producing the record, one person doing the main feature performance on it, a bunch of musicians playing on it, everyone sort of fulfilling different roles. And there's different rights and copyrights related to the different roles. It's important to understand the difference. The underlying right, and this relates to your question, is the right in the song itself. So let's take an example. Give me an example of a song you're going to get a featured artist in.
What I was thinking was the Aussie group You'll Learn to Be Cool.
Yep.
They did they got a singer in to redo Sugar Man.
Yep.
Sugar Man, yeah. So they did that, and I was just wondering how they got around that, because I couldn't imagine them being able to get the rights for that song. It'd be pretty hard to get, yeah. So
it depends. If anyone is strictly entitled to do a straightforward cover version of the song and put it up on and release it, because if you do that, all of the rights in the original song, any money from the publishing side of things will go towards the original. Will go to the original writers, because it'll be a straight. Right. It's just you as a new artist doing a version of an old song. So if you go onto Spotify, you'll see dozens and dozens of different versions of well-known tracks. The issues start to arise where you're starting to do where it's not necessarily a straightforward cover version, where you're creating a new track which interprets or rearranges the original song. And at that point, you get more into territory of it becoming an alternative arrangement. You may need to seek approval from the original rights holders in the song to use that as a sample. And it will depend, I suppose, on the extent to which you're trying to retain some copyright in the new song yourself, and B, just how much you're taking liberty with the original song. Because if you're totally kind of distorting it and creating a very different piece of music out of it, then both of those things are going to require permission. And the original songwriters don't have to grant that permission. So you remember years ago, Junkie XL did a kind of remix of Elvis. It's like the first time Elvis had ever been remixed in that way, because the Elvis estate were obviously incredibly precious about what could and couldn't be done with that material. That's slightly different to the example you're giving, because your example is talking about getting someone in to re-record the vocal. That when you're trying to use the original recording of the original artist, it's going to be more difficult. You've got two sets of rights to clear. You've got to clear the rights from the original songwriters and the rights of the original recording artist. So your initial question about getting a featured artist in to do a re-record of a version, that certainly makes life easier for you, because then you've only got one set of rights to clear, but it doesn't get you out of the woods completely, because you still need to get permission from the original songwriters. For
sure. But I thought that there was a certain time period that like say if a track is over 75 years or something. This is a really grey area for me, and I know a lot of other producers. Like I've asked a lot of people this question. Yep. How old does a track have to be for for there not to be any royalties. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it varies country to country. In the UK, I did my thesis at university about this issue. I worked at RCA, which was Elvis's record label in the UK, and it was just at the time where the early Elvis recordings were about to start coming back into the public domain. So that's what we call it. When copyright runs out, music enters the public domain. So those recordings do exist. You've got to go back a long way to find them. And in the UK at the time, when I wrote my thesis, it was 50 years after the recordings were first released. So you had Elvis, had the Beatles, you had a load of all big copyrights coming up that were potentially going to fall into the public domain. And all sorts of crazy stuff going on around that time where the record companies were trying to remaster those records. So lots of reissues at that time. And they were withdrawing from sale the original 50s recordings, thinking that, because it was untested, whether by taking something to the studio and remastering it, whether that started the clock again, basically. So I don't think that's true. I don't know if that's been tested, but since then, anyway, the period in the UK has been extended to bring it in line with what was the period in the US. I think it's 70 years in the UK, might be even longer in the US, but those periods of time keep getting pushed further and further because the people who have an interest in not letting those rights go into the public domain, it's worth an awful lot of money to them. So it's not just about sound recordings, it's about films as well. So if you think in the US, Disney don't want their original, they don't want Bambi going into the public domain anytime soon. There's a big lobby in the States especially, and all around the world, to keep those rights, locked away. And there's arguments for and against. If you own the rights in that material, you're going to want to hold on to them for as long as you can. But for people who are creating music, and if you want to just have, if you wanted to have access to, say the whole Motown catalogue was suddenly publicly available to every home producer to remix and reinterpret in whatever way they wanted to. Imagine the huge output that would suddenly happen off the back of that if everyone knew they could do that, because Motown's time to use those recordings had run out. So there's arguments for and against, and I started off my thesis thinking I was in favour of the record company because I was like, we're going to lose these rights. And by the time I'd finished writing it, I was thinking, 50 years is plenty to kind of make your money back. I'm kind of against it getting extended and extended. So, answer to your question, if you want to use something, it's got to be old. And I don't know whether it was the case with, but I remember when Moby's Play record came out, it had lots of old kind of gospel and spiritual music on. It sounded really, really old. And I remember thinking at the time whether he picked that specifically because it was in the public domain already. But I'm not sure. I'd have to go and check that. So true. You've got to go back away.
Yeah, I looked up online, and I think the last thing I saw was it has to be 100 years or 99 years now. I'm like, okay, right, that's interesting.
I will find out what it is in Australia.
I'd love to know. But then, I guess it's the artists that you sample where they're from, yeah. Exactly.
It's a minefield.
Because as you said, every country has a different law. What happens what are the repercussions if someone gets caught sampling another artist's music without permission?
It's not much fun. Again, it depends on the scale at which things are happening. Obviously,
I'm sure a lot of people do it.
Yeah,
I've heard so, in almost a lot of tracks these days, there's an old sample from somewhere, subliminally or right in your face. But yeah.
Absolutely, and I think it's just, it's it's nature of electronic music, and and that's what's hugely appealing to so many people, is how people are able to reinterpret the past in ways which are irrelevant. And obviously, lots of underground producers, if tracks are getting put up on white labels, aren't going to go to the trouble of getting stuff cleared at that level. My advice always has to be, you want to sleep well at night, you need to go and get it cleared, and it doesn't have to be that difficult. There are great companies, amazing company in the UK called Sample Clearance Services, run by my friend Saran, and she's just genius at getting things cleared. So I think you can approach companies like that, and usually it's not as expensive as people think it's going to be. And if you feel like the track has got some potential, then it's definitely worth at least looking into it at the outset. If you know something is almost like a club tool and is not going to be destined for for radio play, etc., then you can probably take a view on whether it's worthwhile going to those lengths. If you don't know, and something does turn into a commercially successful record, and you haven't cleared it, you've got all sorts of problems potentially. The first one is financial, because if the record's come out, you haven't got it cleared, you're already on the back foot, you've already infringed their rights. So any kind of negotiation, and most of these times these things do end in negotiation. It's not kind of take it down, we don't want it to be used. There are some artists who just are against sampling per se, and you just would never get it cleared. Or they're again, if you're dealing with like the estate of a deceased, huge artist, then you've got to remember you're not dealing with. You can't really appeal to that artist's creativity. You couldn't say, come on. You can appeal to James Brown to say that what you're doing is he'd be in favour of artistically somehow, but rather you're going to be dealing with teams of lawyers and people who've got no interest in the creative aspect of it.
Sure.
It's more about what they can and can't do with it. So you've got the financial issue of it. You've also got practical issues, which mean as well, the practical issue that someone could just block the sale. It's pretty counterintuitive to do that, because if something's going well, you want to, and if you're the sample owner, you're going to get a share of it. You don't want to stop it, and you don't want to stop the momentum. You want it to do as well as it can do. But you might also then get restricted by the type of deal that you can do. So, for example, say you have sampled someone on who's part of a major label's back catalogue, and you've created a track which is, been huge hit all through the summer in clubs and is now getting picked up at radio. What you find will often happen is the major label that owns the original recording will say, we'll clear their sample for you, but you've got to come and sign to us. And so you're then restricted. You can't sign with the label you want to sign with. And the deal that you end up doing with the major label who happens to own the sample is not going to be the best deal you can possibly get, because you're compromised at that stage. So it's an issue. I think the other issue is if you sampled, and this is a more subtle one, but if you sampled an artist who's within your own group of peers, there's a kind of code of honor. It's like comedians don't steal each other's jokes, but you get if one tech house producer has created a track which sounds very similar to another producer's track, then you've got, and that gets exposed, then you've got credibility issues. And there've been some quite well publicized examples of that, where artists have put something out that's similar to someone else's or sampled someone else's without giving them due credit. Then so there's all sorts of issues basically but it happens all the time. People deal with it, but it's a lot easier to deal with if you deal with it beforehand.
before, yeah.
Afterwards, you're noticing a pattern here.
For sure. Before I keep going about sampling, because I'll have a heap of other questions. If any of the audience have any questions for us, please go for it. Just write it in the comments section.
Yeah, amazing.
We can answer for you.
Yeah.
Getting back to samples, there's a really it actually blew my mind when I found it. It's a website called Who Sampled.
Yep.
I'm sure you know about it.
Yep.
And it's where you can go on and you can write in an artist and see all the samples they've used in all their songs, and it'll even tell you where at what minute or what second the sample's been used. And it absolutely blew my mind when I saw how many samples were being used from other tracks, especially in like house music as well. Yeah.
It's people have very mixed feelings about that website.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
I think it's an incredible resource. I use it a lot for my personal interest. I don't use it professionally because that's not the type of work that we do. But there are law firms in the UK and in America who are they're a bit like the guys who phone you up and say, will you missold insurance? Will you have a claim? Or have you been hurt at work or anything like that? They will be looking through Who Sampled for examples of tracks which perhaps haven't been cleared, and they'll be approaching the original rights holders and saying, would you like us to go and chase the people who didn't get it cleared? Which is probably, that's the right thing to do, maybe, but put yourself in the position of the artists who maybe had hits in the 90s or whoever, and who perhaps looked to clear those samples at the time, but were either unsuccessful, couldn't find the rights holders, etc., etc. For that to raise its head again 20 years later is not going to be much fun for anyone. I think
no.
It's awake at night. So again, people aren't really going to jail for this stuff, but there are, and things tend to get worked out. But it's it's difficult, and you have to put yourself in the position of the original creators as well. You've got, you have like a band like the Winstons or whoever who created the Amen break. Who perhaps
just about to bring that up, actually. Yeah. That's been sampled a lot. So like what, a couple of thousand times or something?
Easily.
Even more.
But you think about the guy who played the drums on that track, and Clyde Stubblefield from James Brown's band, and often, I don't know about those two guys in particular, but often you will have these artists who form part of the landscape which we all live in, which lots of people have built successful careers off. And very often those artists, they're not living in mansions, they're not driving around in sports cars. They've not been compensated for the contribution that they've made to music. So it's right that should be addressed.
For sure.
But again, it's not always that simple, because those performers may not. The deals that they sign with their record labels may mean that it's the record label collecting all of it, not them ultimately as well. So it's complicated, but it's a thing we'll come back to. The world we're in now is more transparent, more accountable than it ever has been. So hopefully we're moving to a position where if musicians have created something which has gone on to be successful and enjoyed by thousands of people, then they should get the compensation that they deserve for that. But we're only just moving into this phase of sort of transparency and accountability, because for years and years the whole music business has operated behind veils and smoke and mirrors, which people find it very difficult to understand and to get to grips with. The next big challenge, obviously, is in relation to streaming income and just how accountable those companies are and how clear it is what artists are entitled to from streaming or from YouTube, etc. as well. So for sure. That's the next area where there's a lack of understanding, perhaps. Yeah,
what if my music is on a podcast or streaming service like Spotify or YouTube? How do I get royalties? Like, how would I claim the royalties?
Let's start with Spotify, because that's the one.
I guess that's being paid, is it?
Yeah, Spotify / Apple Music / Deezer, whatever, the kind of legitimate the legitimate streaming services, where people are getting paid and people are getting paid well. If your music's on there and you've never done a deal with anyone, then that's something you're going to need to take up directly with those services to find out who has uploaded that music and who's saying they've got the rights to it. If you want to get the music up there yourself, then there's different options. You either go to you either have a traditional record deal, or you can use an aggregator to upload that music yourself. And in fact, despite people's protests about how these things are allocated, you do get a lot of information and accountability from those services in terms of who's used what you're getting paid for it. And I think there's a temptation for people to think it's these are tiny sums of money per track, and I forget what the kind of rule of thumb is. Per million streams is a few thousand pounds or dollars, but it's not. There's no hard and fast guide. But I think we use that as a rule of thumb. So it's not. It's about. I think it's about thinking about your career on a long-term basis and how you make the most of the streaming economy that we live in, and that really favours people who can over time build up a body of work and tracks which people are going to come back to again and again and again. And it's a different world that we live in, and if you have a huge airplay hit, then that translates very quickly into streams as well. And the numbers, when you look at what kind of underground, what rap records in America, which aren't getting any radio play, but which it often achieving hundreds of millions of streams within a year, those numbers are very sizable. People are making as much on those type of tracks as people did when they were, selling hit singles via downloads a few years ago.
Yeah, right. Okay, cool. Thanks for that. So I think we've got a few audience questions.
Amazing.
Yeah. Have you got your Facebook one up there now, or let's have a look?
Yeah, let's have a look. Okay, so we've got a question from South Africa. Amazing. Hey, South Africa. It's from Kubu in South Africa. He's got a question about licensing a track to a label 4 years ago. Nothing in the contract that says how long they want to license the track for, and now he wants his rights. He wants his rights back. So with these type of situations, it's very difficult to provide kind of generic advice, and I think this is why people struggle with looking up on the internet what you can do and what you can't do in any given situation. The reason is it's going to vary. It's going to be very specific to what the precise wording of the agreement says. And I think that, again, what I've found is that people are reluctant to come and ask someone like me about those things because they think it's going to take too long or it's going to cost too much money. So we're trying to, again, in line with the sort of the transparency thing we've been talking about, we're trying to make that a lot easier for people. So if you go onto our website, there's a section on there where you can upload a contract in confidence and without any sort of obligation for us to do anything, you're not going to get charged for us to take a quick look at it. But what we'll do is, if people upload those agreements on to the website, we'll arrange a time to speak to you or to talk about it. And very often, something like this question, it's going to be a super simple answer. Hopefully, it's going to say, it's either going to say how long the license is for, or we'll be, by looking at the agreement, we'll be able to tell you quite quickly how that works. And in those situations, these aren't things that this is not what our business is. It's not how we make money just by helping people with simple queries. So we don't charge for, if we can answer something on a phone call, that's not something we charge for. So I think, Beatport can put the link to that page up. Very happy to look at Kubu's contract and see what that specific agreement looks like. But if there really is nothing in the agreement which specifies the length of time, if it's just a license, then, as I say, the UK position would be that's a license that will be terminated on reasonable notice. It's an American deal he mentioned, so the position is going to be slightly different. But we can certainly give him a steer on what he may or may not be entitled to do there, pointing in the direction of US lawyers if there's someone he needs to speak to there. But again, we want people to get in touch. We want people to not be concerned that that we're living in ivory towers and keeping this kind of arcane knowledge to ourselves. We want to be able to help people get through these issues. So Kubu, I think the Beatport guys will put a link up if you want to upload the agreement. As I say, it's in total confidence, so without any obligation to use our services, and we can arrange a time to talk you through that. We've got another question there from Michael. Okay, this is a good one, and particularly close to my heart, because this is where my own musical tastes lie. What's the process, he asks, for releasing re-edits of, say, some disco classics legally? So, if you want to do it, if you want to do a legitimate release of it, you're going to need to go and get the rights from the labels who own those rights. And there's obviously there are people doing that with great success recently. You see, there's been some great there's been some sort of higher profile disco re-edits that have surfaced around Record Store Day and things like. You've always obviously got the underground bootlegs of things, but I'm thinking in particular about some of the who am I thinking?
Dr. Packer, maybe?
Yeah, maybe. And there's been some really good West End re-edits done recently by Medlar and people, which will have gone through, those are done with the original artwork and with the blessing of those labels. And there are, again, there are precedents for those type of deals being done. So you can, it will be a case of approaching those labels and working out the basis on which you can obtain those rights. And I think you can walk in, you can approach them directly if you want to do that, or you can work with label services companies who maybe have more experience of doing those type of things. So who's the other company? So Above Board Distribution in the UK have done some amazing disco re-edit stuff. So I think it's worth, if you've got an idea, that if you think there's an untapped seam of re-edits that would be worth exploring, it's about finding out who owns the rights originally, and that may be owned by some obscure person, or it may be owned by it may be being absorbed into a major label's catalogue. But all of those places have licensing departments, which you can approach if you want to use it for re-edits, or if you want to use it in film and TV. So the doors are open effectively, and it's rarer these days for people to block things just out of principle. Have we got some more questions there? Can you see the questions there?
I think there's one more.
Yeah.
How does a publishing deal differ from a record deal?
Very good question. In the structure of them, tend to be fairly similar. They both tend to be based around periods of time and relate to exclusive rights, etc. But as we touched on before, you've got the publishing deal is the deal that relates to the rights in the actual songs. So again, if we go back to, I keep talking about Motown. Let's talk about Stevie Wonder, who wrote and recorded his own songs. But if you think about the song as signed, sealed, delivered, for example, that song, there are rights in that song whether Stevie Wonder records it, or whether I record it, God forbid, or whether anyone else does a cover version of those songs. The rights in that song, the words and the music, have their own distinct copyright. And so as the writer of that song, and the writer of songs and pieces of music which people may record new versions of, that's what the publishing deal relates to. The record deal relates specifically to the rights in the sound recordings themselves. So the actual version that you're recording. Record deals tend also to require the publishing deal. The publisher's there to ensure your songs are registered correctly, look for use in film and TV of those songs, etc. Pay your advances, account to you, etc. But they're not necessarily being asked to do lots more than that. A record label, you would expect them to do more. You'd expect them to help you make videos, artwork, help with marketing, promotion, all of those things. Work with you as a partner, basically, to get your releases out there. So we've been told we're running out of time. So I think there was one other question which someone raised, and that's about the kind of collection societies. So in Australia, you've got APRA. UK, you've got
correct.
PRS. So if you go into venues, you'll see they have stickers on the doors saying they've got that they're licensed by PRS. That's again lots of historic reasons why these organisations exist, but they're there again to collect income to redistribute to songwriters every time songs are performed in public. So that's when they're performed in public on the radio, when they're performed in live music venues, in clubs, etc. Historically, the way in which, and these companies collect millions of pounds, dollars for songwriters every year, but the way in which they've distributed that income historically has always been quite arbitrary. So if you're Coldplay, you're going to get a big chunk of that income because you're Coldplay. If you're Tyre, not so much. Yeah, not yet.
Not yet.
But one of the really interesting things, which I think Beatport may be involved in it, but certainly the Association for Electronic Music, who are involved in this as well, are really championing a campaign at the moment, which is specifically focused at addressing not just the interests of electronic music, but just accountability generally and transparency in terms of the way in which that income is distributed. So they have a ongoing campaign, and they're working with PRS, APRA, all of the collection societies, as well as venues and as well as technology companies to start, and you may have heard of this already, but to start introducing audio recognition technology into clubs so that we can get much clearer data on the music that's being played at clubs, at festivals, and at live concerts. So you can imagine the impact of that. So if you've had a track which is blown up all summer in Ibiza, being able to see exactly how often that's being played will have an impact on what share of that performance income is paid through. It's incredibly exciting, starting to take hold now, and I think it's a matter of when, not if, we start seeing that employed as standard, which is great news for
that's really cool. That's the first I've heard of that. No.
Yeah, well, look it up. Again, we'll put some links up at the end of this, hopefully, and people can check some of that out. Tyre,
I think that's all we got. Hey,
that's all we got. Thank you so much. It's been, I feel,
thank you.
Privileged to be asked to do this by Beatport. Great to spend some time hanging out with you. I kind of feel slightly glad I'm here in rainy England, not dodging funnel web spiders in the Australian rainforest.
I was battling it earlier today. Yeah, no worries. Thank you so much. You've definitely shined a bit of light on some of those questions that I had that I've been asking for a long time. So yeah, thanks so much for that, and thanks heaps Beatport for hooking this up. And have a great afternoon, guys. It's 1 o'clock for me in the morning, so I'm off to bed.
Thanks, Ty. Keep up the good work.
Richard.
Take care.